Doom: The Dark Ages is an awesome experience, but one that I have a few complaints with. This recent id Software title and third Doom game after the legendary series was stylistically rebooted in 2016's Doom and then received a sequel in 2020's Doom Eternal absolutely rips and tears a new asshole as far as being a captivatingly brutal single-player first-person shooter venture. But unfortunately, Doom: The Dark Ages also runs into an issue that plagues many sequels and prequels and well-respected franchises. That issue being how, compared to its predecessors, the game, as great as it is, isn't as strong. It skipped leg day at the gym. Yet before I dive into my critiques against Doom: The Dark Ages, I still need to firstly and foremostly detail why the game is still very good, even despite my misgivings against it. Because to be clear, Doom: The Dark Ages is worth playing and is an absolute riot when it comes to murdering demons in gruesome yet immensely satisfying ways. It's just a killer good time, especially if you belong in Doom: The Dark Ages' core demographic. You know, the sick fuck demographic. And also, Chris. In today's first part in a multi-installment video series, we'll mostly cover why Doom: The Dark Ages does indeed satisfy the aforementioned sick fucks like myself. So with that, here's the review. Hope you enjoy it. Please like and subscribe and all that shit. I need it. Part 1. Hurt me plenty, daddy. Doom: The Dark Ages positive attributes start with id Software's core design philosophy when developing new installments in the Doom franchise. See, for their last few go-arounds, id Software hasn't embarked on the easiest route when crafting a new Doom experience, mostly because once they're done developing a given Doom title and any potential DLCs, they chuck many gameplay elements present in those said titles and DLCs into the game development hell portal, which is a place usually reserved for developer job security and all the studios that Electronic Arts shit cans. Hell, many of these design elements were aspects that really worked like gangbusters in the prior Doom installments since the franchisal reboot. Because to be clear, id Software is very aware of how much you enjoyed those certain gameplay eccentricities in the previous Doom titles. It's just that they don't really care, which admittedly could be a problem if their follow-up Doom titles turned out to be shit, but that honestly hasn't happened yet, so that argument is moot for the time being. In other words, when developing a new Doom game, id Software creatively challenges themselves by reinventing the gameplay formula that people loved in the prior installment. Because with 2020's Doom Eternal, the studio altered many elements that were present from the prior game in Doom 2016. In fact, the developers switched the control scheme around, ramped up the difficulty, and prioritized action gameplay with increased speed and, on the part of the player, and even more so than in Doom 2016, gunplay requiring constant movement, because it was a true ADHD simulator. In other words, Doom Eternal's design deviated from that of Doom 2016. And id Software altered the design again with 2025's Doom: The Dark Ages, a game that often deviates from the fast and fluid action found in Doom Eternal. Though to be clear, Doom: The Dark Ages is still plenty fluid and fast, but we'll get to that in a bit. Hell, Doom: The Dark Ages gameplay and stylistic flourishes often directly oppose the various unique design traits underpinning Doom Eternal's fast and frantic demon-slaying action, or at least Doom Eternal's fast and frantic rampages against the minions of the Hell Dimension, which honestly can't be much worse than the adversaries in this dimension, save for when Doom Eternal slows down the tempo with the infamous enemy type known as the Marauder, an enemy type that everyone hated because he was antithetical to Doom Eternal's core gameplay of gotta go fast. Because unlike pretty much every other aspect of Doom Eternal's combat, which relies on speed and constant movement, defeating Marauders required the player to time dodges and predict when the Marauder will block our attacks utilizing its shield, which admittedly I think this is a reference to Marauder shields, the martyr who tried to save us from the appalling experience that was Mass Effect 3's shitty ending. Salute to a true hero. Regardless, though, the slow and timed dexterity needed to kick the Marauder's ass was the antithesis of Doom Eternal's quick gunplay, which honestly makes Doom: The Dark Ages core design really fucking bold, especially considering that it kind of recalibrates what didn't work with Doom Eternal's Marauder fights in terms of how they played against the game's design, and transforms that style, albeit very much improved, into the primary function of Doom the Dark Ages combat, a gameplay style that very much revolves around blocking, parrying, and melee combat, something that very much reflects Doom the Dark Ages' medieval, retro science fiction fantasy setting. Speaking of setting though, let me first describe the plot, though it's not really the showcase or reason you should play this game. In this prequel to the Doom reboot series, an emboldened, power-hungry demonic army poses a threat to the human race and their protectors in the Knight Sentinels of Argent Dinner. Can't say that. And as a result, the Knight Sentinels' allies, who are the Makers, send their champion, albeit one that obeys the Makers due to mind control. That champion being the silent but very deadly nameless main protagonist named Doom Guy, who is launched out a medieval spaceship in order to put the demonic threat down, as heroes do. Admittedly, Doom Guy being under the control of the Makers against his will is, according to my sources, a dickhead move, and one that kinda rubs the Knight Sentinels the wrong way, even though they are grateful for Doom Guy's professional demon-slaying expertise. But still, you know, mind control is never a good look, even if it's done by Patrick Stewart. And Doom Guy being under the Maker's thumb is especially gross, considering that Doom Guy would defend humanity from the demonic horde without being psychically manipulated by the Makers. Because Doom Guy hates demons after all, and does not need that outside influence. So from there, Doom Guy must break the Maker's control over him and save humanity in his cool, albeit very messy fighting style that is reminiscent of a toddler trying to conquer spaghetti. Or, let's be honest, me eating spaghetti. I'm fucking disgusting. Doom the Dark Ages story is a story. In fact, I don't really have much to say about it narratively or thematically other than two key aspects. Firstly, the story does its job in delivering a reason for Doom Guy to go murder some demons, which in regards to that, mission accomplished. And secondly, the story reinforces Doom the Dark Ages' medieval sci-fi setting, which inevitably brings us back to the gameplay, which is why you play a Doom game in the first place. Starting with Doom Guy's arsenal of guns, because this is a Doom game, there will always be a lot of guns, obviously. Doom the Dark Ages' ballistic weaponry melds both science fiction and medieval fantasy concepts in creative yet deliciously deadly fashion. Sure, there are more traditionally Doom-style baseline weapons like the combat shotgun and the accelerator, which is basically a plasma gun, but Doom the Dark Ages gunnery is often even more crafty, either by establishing new weapon ideas or by fusing old-school weapon types with new traits inspired by the game's concept. To list them, the Shredder is a machine gun that fires spikes, the Pulverizer launches the bone fragments of a grinded skull in a wide arc, that's pretty fucking metal, by the way. The Chain Shot pummels demonic adversaries by releasing a heavy metal ball. There's a big fucking crossbow, and an amusing style of grenade launcher that shoots little cannonballs, which I enjoyed immensely. Suck my little balls, demon scum. Additionally, most of those weapons also transform into a second weapon. Those little Decepticons. The Cycler is a more heavy-duty plasma weapon. The Impaler, no relation, shoots singular spikes over long distance. The Rocket Launcher is a rocket launcher because it's a rocket launcher. The Super Shotgun, which is essentially a double-barrel shotty. And then there's the Ravager, which is the inverse Pulverizer in that it fires vertically rather than horizontally. I remember those definitions from school. In other words, there are a lot of ways to kill demons with firearms in this game, which is very much exemplified by the fact that all of these guns and ball launchers are accessible via the weapon wheel. You know, one of the Doom series' core franchisal characteristics. As is Doom tradition, the weapon wheel allows the player to switch weapons on the fly with ease even whilst in combat, basically mixing and matching whatever weapon befits the moment of any given demonic encounter. Because despite being an action-heavy first-person shooter, Doom the Dark Ages combat does require some thoughtfulness. Maybe not on the level of Galaxy bouncy brain, but more like Salieri plotting Mozart's demise in Amadeus. Even though, yes, some of the weapon usage is clear-cut and mostly familiar for those who have played either Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal. Notably, the Impaler, not a sex toy, is for precision and distance. The Pulverizer is for crowd control. The rocket launcher is a rocket launcher because it's a rocket launcher. Who knew? And the Super Shotgun, named as such because not all shotguns wear capes, is for the moments where demons invade your facial space, meaning that on the surface, this is familiar territory for a modern Doom experience. And that's even before acknowledging the wide variety of enemy types that favor the utilization of certain weapons over others, which, adjacent to the diversity of available guns, is in line with Doom tradition. But Doom the Dark Ages does add a new idea that spices up the gameplay formula. That idea being armor. Armor has long been a staple of Doomguy's defense against the demonic paparazzi. But in Doom the Dark Ages, many enemy types now don armor as well, because medieval fantasy theme. And sure, certain enemy types in Doom Eternal, the prior entry in the series, wore armor too, but the enemy armor in that game was nowhere near as varied and nuanced compared to the enemy armor in Doom the Dark Ages, mostly because combating armor in Doom Eternal revolved more around finding weak points, utilizing the blood punch melee attack, and such. And then there's just the fact that enemy armor in Doom Eternal was nowhere near as ubiquitous as it is in Doom the Dark Ages, because in the new game, enemies wear armor at a much higher rate than in Doom Eternal, and thus Doom the Dark Ages combat implements enemy armor into the game's core design. It's just an integral part of the gameplay experience. To start to explain, some weapons are better at weakening and even breaking enemy armor than compared to others. In fact, it's the only real reason to use the chain shot, because that shit breaks armor like how I break awkward silences with even more awkward conversation. And aside from the chain shot, other weapons contribute to weakening or breaking armor, like the super shotgun, plasma weapons, and the shield saw, which we will be talking about very soon. Whereas many other weapons deal more damage to naked flesh, because we must punish those demonic nudists. Furthermore, there's a weapon leveling system that further entices a tactical approach to Doom the Dark Ages armaments. See, every weapon in the game can be upgraded using collectible in-game currency, as well as gems and such, to imbue these weapons with certain effects. For example, the combat shotgun can set some enemies ablaze and drop those delectable green armor pickups that are a valuable part of Doomguy's balanced breakfast. Then there's how the Shredder can transform demons into detonatable pincushions under specific circumstances. Close-range rocket launcher blasts can help Doomguy recover health because explosions heal all wounds. Holding the trigger on the Pulverizer for longer periods of time increases fire rate, damage, and/or spread, and so on and so forth, meaning that the firearm upgrades, as well as how the player receives new weapons at regular intervals, imbue the game with a strong sense of pace that consistently adds new gameplay twists and turns to the regimen. It's just high quality, good shit. And that's all even before broaching how Doom the Dark Ages is more than just a gun show. No relation. In fact, the game introduces melee weapons to the mix as well. There's the quick-hitting Power Gauntlet, the impactful Flail, and the heavy-hitting Dread Mace. These three weapons are utilized by either collectible charges or just waiting for a cooldown meter. And these melee weapons all have their own strengths and weaknesses. The Power Gauntlet features the most charges and is the quickest, yet is arguably the least lethal of these attacks. The Flail is great at breaking armor, and the Dread Mace packs a wallop, but is slower than Slowpoke. So there's strategy and variety to be had with the melee attacks as well, and that's even before we get into how these items can be upgraded adjacent to the more projectile weapons. You know, like how Doomguy receives armor when breaking enemy armor with the flail and such. Doomguy also wields a shield, and one that is pretty fucking metal at that. This shield, named the Shield Saw for reasons that are about to be very self-explanatory, is functional for both attack and defensive strategies. In terms of attack, the Shield Saw is fitted with a chainsaw-style rotating blade encircling the shield's circumference. From there, Doomguy can chuck the Shield Saw at enemies as if he were Captain America, albeit a version of Captain America who ensures that the funeral arrangements for his foes are closed casket. Doomguy can also use the Shield Saw to grapple himself towards enemies in order to smack them with a shield bash, throw the shield at weakened enemy armor that will cause that said enemy armor to break, and the Shield Saw can also also stun larger enemies, which allows the player to rattle off a few easy shots with whatever weapon they believe that said enemy is most susceptible to. Like this poor fucker whose weakness is literally taking a double barrel to the brain. Though in Brainiac the Spider Edition's defense, that's a weakness that many of us share as well. Additionally, the shield saw, like all the other weapons listed, is upgradable. The upgrades involve reach, bouncing off more enemies, being able to cleanly carve through demons aside from the ones that are just fodder, and etc. Meaning that it's just another way that Doom the Dark Ages keeps introducing new ideas and mechanics in the game. And that's all even before acknowledging the shield saw's blocking and, more importantly, parrying mechanics. As one would expect, the shield saw allows the player to block incoming attacks because it's a fucking shield. Though of course there is a meter preventing the player from holding the block button forever, so don't try that, you'll get wrecked. In other words, obviously, blocking helps withstand a large intake of demonic aggression, but for clear-cut balancing issues, you can't rely on blocking forever, because unfortunately, this isn't Blue Sky. However, the parrying mechanic is the shield saw's best attribute. See, demonic attacks are color-coded. Blockable attacks are red, whereas attacks that can be parried are green. Once parried, the enemy attack is basically Uno reversed to the demon who had the abysmally poor judgment to fuck with me, overall dealing damage to the demon instead of Doom Guy. Which on the surface sounds really basic, but the mechanic becomes a literal game changer with the introduction of runes. In fact, there are 4 runes that Doom Guy accrues throughout Doom the Dark Ages runtime, and when successfully parrying, they all offer different styles of attack in terms of damage, range, stun, and just basic crowd control, as well as upgradable attributes that can cause demons damaged by these runes to drop armor, health pickups, and such, overall ensuring that the parrying mechanic is necessary if you desire to have any success in Doom the Dark Ages. And while sure, the runes themselves have a cooldown meter, so even if you parry a bunch of successive attacks in a row, only one of those will trigger the effect on the rune, this doesn't alter the fact that runes, like the rest of Doom the Dark Ages weaponry, are valuable contributions to the game, ones that ensure that the game is consistently fun, engaging, and all around pretty damn awesome. So yeah, there's a lot to really love about Doom the Dark Ages combat, and honestly, that's only the littlest tip of the Polish sausage of why Doom the Dark Ages is pretty fucking rad, why it overall works as a gameplay experience.